Chapter 2, The Four Noble Truths. The first noble truth, dukkha. The heart of the Buddhist teaching lies in the Four Noble Truths, which he expounded in his very first sermon to his old colleagues, the five ascetics, at Isipatana, near Benares. In this sermon, as we have it in the original text, these four truths are given briefly, but there are innumerable places in the early Buddhist scriptures where they are explained again and again with greater detail and in different ways. If we study the Four Noble Truths with the help of these references and explanations, we get a fairly good and accurate account of the essential teachings of the Buddha according to the original texts. The Four Noble Truths are dukkha, samudaya, the arising or the origin of dukkha, nirodha, the cessation of dukkha, and magga, the way leading to the cessation of dukkha. The first noble truth, dukkha. The first noble truth, dukkha ariya sacca, is generally translated by almost all scholars as the noble truth of suffering, and it is interpreted to mean that life according to Buddhism is nothing but suffering and pain. Both translation and interpretation are highly unsatisfactory and misleading. It is because of this limited, free and easy translation and its superficial interpretation that many people have been misled into regarding Buddhism as pessimistic. First of all, Buddhism is neither pessimistic nor optimistic. If anything at all, it is realistic, for it takes a realistic view of life and of the world. It looks at things objectively. It does not falsely lull you into living in a fool's paradise, nor does it frighten and antagonize you with all kinds of imaginary fears and sins. It tells you exactly and objectively what you are and what the world around you is, and shows you the way to perfect freedom, peace, tranquility, and happiness. One physician may gravely exaggerate an illness and give up hope altogether. Another may ignorantly declare that there is no illness and that no treatment is necessary, thus deceiving the patient with false consolation. You may call the first one pessimistic and the second optimistic. Both are equally dangerous. But a third physician diagnoses the symptoms correctly, understands the cause and the nature of the illness, sees clearly that it can be cured, and courageously administers a course of treatment, thus saving his patient. The Buddha is like the last physician. He is the wise and scientific doctor for the ills of the world. It is true that the Pali word dukkha in ordinary usage means suffering, pain, sorrow, or misery, as opposed to the word sukha, meaning happiness, comfort, or cause, or ease. But the term dukkha, as the first noble truth, which represents the Buddha's view of life and the world, has a deeper philosophical meaning and connotes enormously wider senses. It is admitted that the term dukkha in the first noble truth contains quite obviously the ordinary meaning of suffering, but in addition it also includes deeper ideas such as imperfection, impermanence, emptiness, insubstantiality. It is difficult, therefore, to find one word to embrace the whole conception of the term dukkha as in the first noble truth, and so it is better to leave it untranslated than to give an inadequate and wrong idea of it by conveniently translating it as suffering or pain. The Buddha does not deny happiness in life when he says there is suffering. On the contrary, he admits different forms of happiness, both material and spiritual, for laymen as well as for monks. In the Anguttara Nikaya, one of the 5 original collections in Pali containing the Buddha's discourses, there is a list of happiness, sukhani, such as the happiness of family life and the happiness of the life of a recluse, the happiness of sense pleasures and the happiness of renunciation, the happiness of attachment and the happiness of detachment, physical happiness, mental happiness, etc. But all of these are included in dukkha. Even the very pure spiritual states of dhyana, recoilment of or trance, attained by the practice of higher meditation, free from even a shadow of suffering in the accepted sense of the word, states which may be described as unmixed happiness, as well as the state of dhyana, which is free from sensations both pleasant, sukha, and unpleasant, dukkha, and is only pure equanimity and awareness. Even these very high spiritual states are included in dukkha. And in one of the suttas, the Majjhima Nikaya, again one of the 5 original collections, after praising the spiritual happiness of these dhyanas, the Buddha says that they are impermanent, dukkha, and subject to change, anicca, dukkha, viparamana dhamma. Notice that the word dukkha is explicitly used. It is dukkha not because there is suffering in the ordinary sense of the word, but because whatever is impermanent is dukkha. Yad anicchang tang dukkhang. The Buddha was realistic and objective. He says, with regard to life and the enjoyment of sense pleasures, that one should clearly understand 3 things. 1. Attraction or enjoyment, asada. 2. Evil consequence or danger or unsatisfactoriness, adijinava. And 3. Freedom or liberation, nisaranha. When you see a pleasant, charming, and beautiful person, you like him or her. You are attracted, you enjoy seeing that person again and again. You derive pleasure and satisfaction from that person. This is enjoyment, asada. It is a fact of experience. But this enjoyment is not permanent, just as that person and all his or her attractions are not permanent either. When the situation changes, when you cannot see that person, when you are deprived of this enjoyment, you become sad and may become unreasonable and unbalanced. You may even behave foolishly. This is the evil, unsatisfactory, and dangerous side of the picture, adinava. This too is a fact of experience. Now, if you have no attachment to the person, if you are completely detached, that is freedom, liberation, nisarana. These 3 things are true with regard to all enjoyment in life. From this, it is evident that it is no question of pessimism or optimism, but that we must take account of the pleasures of life as well as of the pains and sorrows, and also of freedom from them, in order to understand life completely and objectively. Only then is true liberation possible. Regarding this question, the Buddha says, O bhikkhus, if any recluses or brahmanas do not understand objectively in this way that the enjoyment of sense pleasures is enjoyment, that their unsatisfactoriness is unsatisfactoriness, that liberation from them is liberation, then it is not possible that they themselves will certainly understand the desire for sense pleasures completely, or that they will be able to instruct other persons to that end, or that the person following their instruction will completely understand the desire for sense pleasures. But, O bhikkhus, if any recluses or brahmanas understand objectively in this way that the enjoyment of sense pleasures is enjoyment, that their unsatisfactoriness is unsatisfactoriness, that liberation from them is liberation, then it is possible that they themselves will certainly understand the desire for sense pleasures completely, and that they will be able to instruct another person to that end, and that person following their instruction will completely understand the desire for sense pleasures. The conception of dukkha may be viewed from three aspects. 1. Dukkha as ordinary suffering, dukkha. 2. Dukkha as produced by change, viparanama dukkha, and dukkha as conditioned states, sankhara dukkha. All kinds of suffering in life, like birth, old age, sickness, death, association with unpleasant persons and conditions, separation from beloved ones and pleasant conditions, not getting what one desires, grief, lamentation, distress, all such forms of physical and mental suffering which are universally accepted as suffering or pain are included in dukkha as ordinary suffering. Dukkha. A happy feeling, a happy condition of life is not permanent, not everlasting. It changes sooner or later. When it changes, it produces pain, suffering, unhappiness. This vicissitude is included in dukkha as suffering produced by change. Viparanama dukkha. It is easy to understand the two forms of suffering, dukkha, mentioned above. No one will dispute them. This aspect of the First Noble Truth is more popularly known because it is easy to understand. It is common experience in our daily life. But the third form of dukkha as conditioned states, sankhara dukkha, is the most important philosophical aspect of the First Noble Truth, and it requires some analytical explanation of what we consider as a being, as an individual, or as I. What we call a being or individual or I, according to Buddhist philosophy, is only a combination of ever-changing physical and mental forces or energies, which may be divided into 5 groups or aggregates. Pancha Khanda. The Buddha says, in short, these 5 aggregates of attachment are dukkha. Elsewhere, he distinctly defines dukkha as the 5 aggregates. O bhikkhus, what is dukkha? It should be said that it is the 5 aggregates of attachment. Here it should be clearly understood that dukkha and the 5 aggregates are not 2 different things. The 5 aggregates themselves are dukkha. We will understand this point better when we have some notion of the 5 aggregates which constitute the so-called being. Now, what are these 5? The 5 aggregates. The first aggregate is the aggregate of matter, rupa kanda. In this term, aggregate of matter are included the four great elements, Chattari Mahabhutani, namely solidity, fluidity, heat, and motion, and also the derivatives, upadaya rupa, of the four great elements. In the term derivatives of four great elements are included our five material sense organs, i.e. the faculties of eye, ear, nose, tongue, and body, and their corresponding objects in the external world, i.e. visible form, sound, odor, taste, and tangible things, and also some thoughts or ideas or conceptions which are in the sphere of mind objects, dharmayatana. Thus the whole realm of matter, both internal and external, is included in the aggregate of matter. The second is the aggregate of sensations, Vedanakanda. In this group are included all our sensations, pleasant or unpleasant or neutral, experienced through the contact of physical and mental organs with the external world. They are of six kinds. The sensations experienced through the contact of the eye with visible forms, ear with sounds, nose with odor, tongue with taste, body with tangible objects, and mind with the sixth faculty in Buddhist philosophy, with mind objects or thoughts or ideas. All our physical and mental sensations are included in this group. A word about what is meant by the term mind in Buddhist philosophy may be useful here. It should clearly be understood that mind is not spirit as opposed to matter. It should always be remembered that Buddhism does not recognize a spirit opposed to matter as is accepted by most other systems of philosophies and religions. Mind is only a faculty or organ, indriya, like the eye or the ear. It can be controlled and developed like any other faculty, and the Buddha requires quite often of the and the Buddha speaks quite often of the value of controlling and disciplining these six faculties. The difference between the eye and the mind as faculties is that the former senses the world of colors and visible forms, while the latter senses the world of ideas and thoughts and mental objects. We experience different fields of the world with different senses. We cannot hear colors, but we can see them, nor can we see sounds, but we can hear them. Thus, with our five physical sense organs, eye, ear, nose, tongue, body, we experience only the world of visible forms, sounds, odors, tastes, and tangible objects. But these represent only a part of the world, not the whole world. What of ideas and thoughts? They are also a part of the world, but they cannot be sensed. They cannot be conceived by the faculty of the eye, ear, nose, tongue, or body, yet they can be conceived by another faculty, which is mind. Now ideas and thoughts are not independent of the world experienced by these five physical sense faculties. In fact, they depend on and are conditioned by physical experiences. Hence, a person born blind cannot have ideas of color except through the analogy of sounds or some other things experienced through his other faculties. Ideas and thoughts, which form a part of the world, are thus produced and conditioned by physical experiences and are conceived by the mind. Hence, mind, manas, is considered a sense faculty or organ, indriya, like the eye or the ear. The third is aggregate of perceptions, sanyakanda. Like sensations, perceptions are of 6 kinds in relation to 6 internal faculties and the corresponding 6 external objects. Like sensations, they are produced through the contact of our 6 faculties with the external world. It is the perceptions that recognize objects, whether physical or mental. The fourth is the aggregate of mental formations, Sankara Kanda. In this group are included all volitional activities, both good and bad. What is generally known as karma or kama comes under this group. The Buddha's own definition of karma should be remembered here. O bhikkhus, it is volition, chaitana, that I call karma. Having willed, one acts through body, speech, and mind. Volition is mental construction, mental activity. Its function is to direct the mind in the sphere of good, bad, or neutral activities. Just like sensations and perceptions, volition is of 6 kinds connected with the 6 internal faculties and the corresponding 6 objects, both physical and mental, in the external world. Sensations and perceptions are not volitional actions. They do not produce karmic effects. It is only volitional actions such as attention, manasikara, will, chanda, determination, adhimokkha, confidence, sada, concentration, samadhi, wisdom, panya, energy, virya, desire, raga, repugnance or hate, patiga, ignorance, ajiva, conceit, mana, idea of self, sakaya detti, etc., that can produce karmic effects. There are 52 such mental activities which constitute the aggregate of mental formations. The 5th is the aggregate of consciousness. Consciousness is a reaction or response which has one of the 6 faculties, eye, ear, nose, tongue, body, and mind, as its basis, and one of the 6 corresponding external phenomena, visible form, sound, odor, taste, tangible things, and mind objects, i.e., an idea or thought as its object. For instance, visual consciousness, chakku vijnana, has the eye as its basis and a visible form as its object. Mental consciousness, mano vijnana, has the mind, manas, as its basis and a mental object, i.e. an idea or thought, Dhamma, as its object. So consciousness is connected with other faculties. Thus, like sensation, perception, and volition, consciousness also is of 6 kinds in relation to 6 internal faculties and corresponding 6 external objects. It should be clearly understood that consciousness does not recognize an object. It is only a sort of awareness of the presence of an object. When the eye comes in contact with a color, for instance, blue, visual consciousness arises which simply is aware of the presence of a color. But it does not recognize that it is blue. There is no recognition at this stage. It is perception, the 3rd aggregate discussed above, that recognizes that it is blue. The term visual consciousness is a philosophical expression denoting the same idea as is conveyed by the ordinary word seeing. Seeing does not mean recognizing, so are the other forms of consciousness. It must be repeated here that according to Buddhist philosophy, there is no permanent, unchanging spirit which can be considered self or soul or ego or opposed to matter, and that consciousness, vijnana, should not be taken as spirit in opposition to matter. This point has to be particularly emphasized because a wrong notion that consciousness is a sort of self or soul that continues as a permanent substance through life has persisted from the earliest time to the present day. One of the Buddha's own disciples, Sati by name, held that the Master taught it is the same consciousness that transmigrates and wanders about. The Buddha asked him what he meant by consciousness. Sati's reply is classical. It is that which expresses, which feels, which experiences the results of good and bad deeds here and there. To whomever, you stupid one, remonstrated the Master, have you heard me expounding the doctrine in this manner? Haven't I in many ways explained consciousness as arising out of conditions that there is no arising of consciousness without conditions? Then the Buddha went on to explain consciousness in detail. Consciousness is named according to whatever condition through which it arises. On account of the eye and visible forms arises a consciousness, and it is called visual consciousness. On account of the ear and the sounds arises a consciousness, and it is called auditory consciousness. On account of the nose and odors arises a consciousness, and it is called olfactory consciousness. On account of the tongue and tastes arises a consciousness, and it is called gustatory consciousness. On account of the body and tangible objects arises a consciousness, and it is called tactile consciousness. On account of the mind and mind objects, ideas and thoughts, arises a consciousness, and it is called mental consciousness. Then the Buddha explained it further by an illustration. A fire is named according to the material on account of which it burns. A fire may burn on account of wood, and it is called wood fire. It may burn on account of straw, and then it is called straw fire. So consciousness is named according to the condition through which it arises. Dwelling on this point, Buddhaghosa, the great commentator, explains, a fire that burns on account of wood burns only when there is a supply, but dies down in that very place when the supply is no longer there, because then the condition has changed, but the fire does not cross over to splinters, etc., and become a splinter fire, and so on. Even so, the consciousness that arises on account of the eye and visible forms arise in that gate of sense organ, i.e. the eye, only when there is the condition of the eye, visible forms, light, and attention, but ceases then and there when the condition is no more there, because then the condition has changed, but the consciousness does not cross over to the ear, etc., and become auditory consciousness, and so on. The Buddha declared in unequivocal terms that consciousness depends on matter, sensation, perception, and mental formations, and that it cannot exist independently of them. He says consciousness may exist having matter as its means, rupa payam, matter as its consciousness, rupa ramanang, matter as its support, rupa patitatang, and seeking delight it may grow, increase and develop. Or consciousness may exist, having sensation as its means, or perception as its means, or mental formations as its means, mental formations as its object, mental formations as its support, and seeking delight it may grow, increase, and develop. Were a man to say, I shall show the coming, the going, the passing away, the arising, the growth, the increase, or the development of consciousness apart from matter, sensation, perception, and mental formations, he would be speaking of something that does not exist. Very briefly, these are the 5 aggregates. What we call a being, or an individual, or I, is only a convenient name or a label given to the combination of these 5 groups. They are impermanent, all constantly changing. Whatever is impermanent is dukkha. Yad anicchang tang dukkhang. This is the true meaning of the Buddha's words. In brief, the 5 aggregates of attachment are dukkha. They are not the same for 2 consecutive moments. Here, A is not equal to A. They are in flux of momentary arising and disappearing. O Brahmana, it is just like a mountain river, flowing far and swift, taking everything along with it. There is no moment, no instant, no second when it stops flowing, but it goes on flowing and continuing. So Brahmana is human life, like a mountain river, as the Buddha told Ratapala. The world is in continuous flux and is impermanent. One thing disappears, conditioning the appearance of the next in the series of cause and effect. There is no unchanging substance in them. There is nothing behind them that is called a permanent self, Atman, individuality, or anything that can in reality be called I. Everyone will agree that neither matter, nor sensation, nor perception, nor any one of those mental activities, nor consciousness can really be called I. But when these 5 physical and mental aggregates, which are independent, are working together in combination as a physio-psychological machine, we get the idea of I. But this is only a false idea, a mental formation which is nothing but one of those 52 mental formations of the 4th aggregate which we have discussed. Namely, it is the idea of self, Sakaya Detti. These 5 aggregates together, which we popularly call a being, are dukkha itself, Sankhara dukkha. There is no other being or I standing behind these 5 aggregates who experiences dukkha. As Buddhaghosa says, mere suffering exists, but no sufferer is found. The deeds are, but no doer is found. There is no unmoving mover behind the movement. It is only movement. It is not to say that life is moving, but life is movement itself. Life and movement are not 2 different things. In other words, there is no thinker behind the thought. Thought itself is the thinker. If you remove the thought, there is no thinker to be found. Here we cannot fail to notice how this Buddhist view is diametrically opposed to the Cartesian cognito ergo sum. I think, therefore I am. Now a question may be raised whether life has a beginning. According to the Buddhist teaching, the beginning of the life stream of living beings is unthinkable. The believer in the creation of life by God may be astonished at this reply, but if you were to ask him, what is the beginning of God? He would answer without hesitation, God has no beginning, and he is not astonished at his own reply. The Buddha says, O bhikkhus, this cycle of continuity, samsara, is without end, and the first beginning of beings wandering and running around, envelops in ignorance, ajiva, and bounded down by fetters of thirst, desires, tanha, is not to be perceived. And further referring to ignorance, which is the main cause of the continuity of life, the Buddha states, the first beginning of ignorance, ajiva, is not to be perceived in such a way as to postulate that there was no ignorance beyond a certain point. Thus it is not possible to say that there was no life beyond a certain definite point. This, in short, is the meaning of the noble truth of dukkha. It is extremely important to understand the first noble truth clearly, because, as the Buddha says, he who sees dukkha sees also the arising of dukkha, sees also the cessation of dukkha, and sees also the path leading to the cessation of dukkha. This does not at all make the life of a Buddhist melancholy or sorrowful, as some people wrongly imagine. On the contrary, a true Buddhist is the happiest of beings. He has no fears or anxieties. He is always calm and serene, and he cannot be upset or dismayed by changes or calamities, because he sees things as they are. The Buddha was never melancholy or gloomy. He was described by his contemporaries as ever smiling. Hita Pubamgama. In Buddhist painting and scripture, the Buddha is always represented with a countenance happy, serene, contented, and compassionate. Never a trance of suffering or agony or pain is to be seen. Buddhist art and architecture, Buddhist temples, never give the impression of gloom or sorrow, but produce an atmosphere of calm and serene joy. Although there is suffering in life, a Buddhist should not be gloomy over it, should not be angry or impatient at it. One of the principal evils in life, according to Buddhism, is repugnance or hatred. Repugnance, pratiga, is explained as ill will with regard to living beings, with regard to suffering, and with regard to things pertaining to suffering. Its function is to produce a basis for unhappy states and bad conduct. Thus, it is wrong to be impatient at suffering. Being impatient or angry at suffering does not remove it. On the contrary, it adds a little more to one's troubles and aggravates and exacerbates a situation already disagreeable. What is necessary is not anger or impatience, but the understanding of the question of suffering, how it comes about, and how to get rid of it, and then to work according with patience, intelligence, determination, and energy. There are two Buddhist texts called the Therigatha and the Therigatha, which are full of the joyful utterances of the Buddha's disciples, both male and female, who found peace and happiness in life through his teaching. The king of Kosala once told the Buddha that unlike many a disciple of other religious systems who looked haggard, coarse, pale, emaciated, and unprepossessing, his disciples were joyful and elated, hata pahata, jubilant and exultant, enjoying the spiritual life with faculties pleased, free from anxiety, serene, peaceful, and living with a gazelle's mind, i.e. light-hearted. The king added that he believed that this healthy disposition was due to the fact that these venerable ones had certainly realized the great and full significance of the Blessed One's teaching. Buddhism is quite opposed to the melancholic, sorrowful, penitent, and gloomy attitude of mind which is considered a hindrance to the realization of truth. On the other hand, it is interesting to remember here that joy, piti, is one of the 7 bhojangas, or factors of enlightenment, the essential qualities to be cultivated for the realization of nirvana.